Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I apologize. I have little girls that are recording at church right now, so they're recording for their Christmas program. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to chat, and it's always a pleasure to be in the same panel with Councilwoman Valdemoros and all the work that Salt Lake City is doing. And as a Salt Lake City resident, it's always refreshing to hear that I live in a city that's certainly moving the needle towards a more sustainable community. As presented before, my name is Luz Escamilla, and I'm a Utah State Senator representing Senate District 1, which will change to Senate District 10 after this redistricting process. Numbering of districts has changed, so just be aware that the district you're in will not be the same as 2022 begins. So Senate District 1, currently Senate District 1 is considered, if you want to just think of an area, is a northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City and about half of West Valley City. The new district will look a little bit different, not very different. We're still going to be the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City and a lot of West Valley, and now Magna will be completely in my district. So I'm happy that I was able to keep as much of this community. The reason why I bring up that community is that for me, the lens of sustainability and the environment comes from a social justice lens of intersectionality. As a woman of color, certainly this process, cannot be seen in just from one area. It's all about intersectionality. And I really encourage people to think about sustainability and the environment from that perspective. We've been working the last couple of years to address, just the pieces of one, depoliticize the conversation. And that's really difficult, especially in such a divided country. I think, and even worldwide, the conversation tends to be politicized, unfortunately. So the way I start talking about this issue, especially in this issue, is that it affects everyone. I mean, there's no way someone can say it doesn't affect me, whether you have, bad air quality or not. It is something that impacts everyone. And the other piece is, just trying to remove a letter from a name of someone that's talking about this issue can be very helpful as an exercise. So remove the R or the D. I think it certainly helps bring this issue to the visibility of just a reality where we certainly need to make sure that communities understand that this is not only impactful for you and your next generation, is just the issue of stewardship, which I think for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints needs to be really about accountability and in something in self-reliance. You can think about self-reliance without thinking about stewardship of the place that you are occupying right now, which was a gift of the Lord. And that to me has been a good opportunity to bring that perspective and that angle to the conversation. The last, and really, there's a lot of technical pieces to issues related to the environment. And that's why I think people sometimes don't even want to talk about it. I mean, you think about, PM 2.5 or just levels of how do we even measure good or bad air quality. You can get very technical, but at the same time, when you have these multiple social determinants of health, and that's where this intersectionality comes, impacting your quality of life, you can't even put it on the side. It is hard sometimes from a social justice perspective to address, air quality when you don't have food at the table or you don't have a place to live. If you think about that pyramid of just sustainability, your air quality issue becomes maybe a little bit higher in that pyramid. You're trying to first survive. So for many of the communities that get disproportionately impacted, by the environmental issues, like, and by that disproportionately meaning it's in their face, it's still maybe the last issue to address when they're still addressing issues of, like I said, hunger, poverty, violence, or access to very basic things. And that's sometimes the challenge in many of our communities, and at least in my district, where we have the worst air quality in the entire state. But it's, for them, it's like, I can't even afford to pay my rent. So, how do you then connect them and make sure that they understand that because you can't afford to pay your rent, you're probably going to have more impactful and negatively impacted by the air quality that you're breathing and your kids are breathing. So personally, I started, obviously the air quality is an issue that's been in our faces as a resident of Rose Park forever. But in the last, I would say 10 years, it's been just more obvious that it's part of our community. And it's been really an issue that made me develop asthma, for example, and have the youngest of our children have asthma as a baby. And for me, it was a clear correlation of the location where I live. And it's very sad to think that a medical condition now is part of our lives because of the place where we choose to live and where we consider our community. I really also just want to emphasize that for many lawmakers, again, because of the technical components, they may feel a little bit shy to engage on very technical conversations. So one of the things I encourage people is to really focus on just things that everyone can understand as they engage in some of these conversations. Legislators by nature are generalists, so they're not going to be experts on everything. You may have some legislators that become, subject matter experts just based on their professional background, or they picked up on issues that impact their districts that may have have taught them to develop some new levels of expertise. In my case, the inland port is obviously one of them, where maybe, air quality has always been an issue, but when the inland port came and was, the beginning of what we have now as the inland port, and what will be impacting the rest of not only this area, but the whole state of Utah, I had to learn more about just what we're talking about and how even thinking not only 2 or 3 years ahead, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, those long-term, 50 years from now, long-term impacts are critical as part of the conversation. I've been working, so my first interaction with air quality, as an example, was a group of mothers that came to the Capitol. And I didn't have many years as a legislator. I was probably I believe it was my first term. And they were in the next, kind of like next to my district, so the following district, which is Senate District 23. And it was North Salt Lake, that Foxborough area. And many of these mothers, and I say mothers because they came as moms, addressing a pretty unique issue related to waste, and the fact that they by themselves have gathered this data of the number of miscarriages and children's with their children being born with some medical conditions that were very unique, and just statistically didn't make sense that there was that many of them in that specific area. And to them, there was a correlation to some of the issues that they were seeing with some air quality issues and waste related issues within their community. And the very basic thought for me as a mother was, well, of course they have to come in and fight for changes, and what a no-brainer, let's fix it. Little did I know that I was going to encounter an opposition of industries coming with everything they have, and the sink included, to stop a very basic statute of limitation, which was really odd because in our entire code, there's really one only one part of our code that has at that point had a 1-year statute of limitation. And it was a violation of the environmental code. And I thought, oh, well, that's odd. I mean, everything else you have in average between 5 to 6, 7 years. There were maybe a few that are 3 to 5, but averaging most of them are 5 years. So I found that a little bit unique. The Division of Air Quality was, they were, well, it's what the statute says, and that's what the legislature wants as a policy. And I said, well, that just doesn't sound fair. And it's not fair even for you guys as an enforcement agency to think that you have a 1-year statute of limitation. Well, what was happening is industry had taken care of that 1-year statute of limitation, but according to our resources, an investigator, for example, in that division that does the enforcement part, could only visit at in an average will take him 1.5 years to do a round of the companies or industries that they were responsible for. So with a 1 statute of limitation, it really was a defeat. I mean, even if you find, if your findings have any violation of our Utah code, it was impossible for any really enforcement mechanism to be implemented or executed. So my goal was like, hey, let's move it to 5 years. It's really an average of what we have in our code. And man, that was not a happy moment. And I certainly felt the pressure. The following year we came and it took me literally 2 more sessions to get us to one. We were able to codify it and make it stronger, some of the wording and ability for investigators to come in, but it still did only an increase of an extra year. So you guys know we still have in our code really just 2-year statute of limitation, but the fight just to get us there was pretty steep. So that was one piece. The other piece was within the inland port, of course, has been a lot of work done to address, talking about air quality and impact, not only air quality, water, impact to water and sound pollution and lighting pollution. So the challenge was, how do we even measure? We don't have a way to measure threshold of impact. So the first bill I passed related to the inland port it was specifically to data collection and starting the data collection now. So we have a way to compare, right? Because if I start collecting data by the time you have 80,000 more vehicles on the road, or whatever the case, semis driving through I-80 and 215 in that intersection part, then why even bother? I don't have nowhere to compare to what we had before. So we were able to fund a more robust infrastructure of data collection on air quality, PM 2.5 specifically, and then also water quality. And by the way, add EPA standard level data collection. And it was now former Representative Gibson, my House sponsor. And if you've been following the inland port legislation, he actually was the sponsor of the main inland port bill, which I opposed, of course. And I came back to him saying, look, I mean, you succeeded in, putting the inland port in what I think is the worst place to put an inland port. And it's in my district. So I'm reaching to you asking for help as the impact is coming, and it's not going to stop. And we're seeing it already, in our communities. And there's a lot of anger and frustration on our community, but we want to work with the inland port as much as we can. I mean, it is here to stay and I won't be able to control that, but can we at least do this measurement piece and data collection? And he agreed, and he was my House sponsor. He did put one thing as a caveat, and I learned, this was a learning lesson. And one of the things that he said is like, fine, Luz, we'll do this, and I have no problem. And said, and I'll do it more for you out of respect. But it's like, what bothers me about, the environmental tree hugger people is that, here they are having a massive fit about the inland port when no one has complained about the airport, the Salt Lake International Airport. And I paused for a moment because he is 100% right. And he's like, you guys are just about to open the second stage of the airport, massively more planes coming in. You live literally 3 minutes away from there. And I don't see you having a massive fit about the airport. And really, I have to admit, I'm like, you're right. Convenience for somehow has been, forgetting that component that's here in my district, in my area. So his request, and it happened, was he wanted to put one of those, EPA standard monitoring equipment at the Salt Lake International Airport, which is in there. And he said, and I wanted to be there to prove to all of you that most of and this is his theory, and I don't know that is, I can't say evidence shows that is true or not, but his point was, I can guarantee you tons of your air pollution and air quality issue are coming from the international airport. And it was interesting just to even, for me, was a learning piece to say, one, maybe we don't have all the answers, right? But what a great opportunity to come together and listen to his perspective, because everybody maybe had a very different idea of who this man is and what his, why he was doing all of this that he was doing, and interfering clearly in a different community that was not his community, which is a problem. But he also made a great point, and I said, I take your feedback and made me pause and think, as someone that lives literally 3 minutes to 4 minutes away from the airport, that you may be right. And I'm glad that we're putting a monitor in that area, and we get to also see that information, right, as the international airport continues to grow. So I just want to leave that as a piece of, of our just process of how do we address this in a compassionate way, right? In a way that allows for all of us to listen more, at the same time removing maybe all we can of a political process. It will require a political process to make the changes. So I always tell people, look, we are responsible, all of us. I think everyone, if you happen to live in a place where maybe your air quality is better, your water quality is better, good for you. Like, what a fortunate, blessed person you are. But at the end of the day, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to where your children are interacting with kids that maybe their quality of life is not as good, and they're ill, and they may, connect at some point. And is that what you want of a community? And so asking those questions, I usually get from my colleagues. Oh, here comes Salt Lake City complaining again. And by that Salt Lake City, I mean like the city government, meaning just Salt Lake City residents, right? Capital City residents complaining about something. And I usually say, look, Salt Lake City residents are families. Their moms, their dads, they go to work, they wake up like you do, and all they want is a better place for their families. And I'm sure if you happen to disproportionately be impacted by homelessness or air quality, you will probably be doing the same and hoping for a better situation. So I just, those are some of the remarks. There's more to do. So you guys are aware, some of the pieces that are exciting is we are collecting data on the UTA tracks line. And that's another legislation that I work on and funding to put monitors to collect data as it's happening. And we work with Dr. Daniel Mendoza at the University of Utah. And some of the work that Dr. Mendoza is doing, which is really exciting, is like just connecting health, like literally your health, your pulmonary, status to air quality, and connecting it with communities such as, UTA tracks line and schools. So he did a great study with schools in the Salt Lake School District in Granite, and I believe in Jordan School District, because it carries the whole tracks line in the Salt Lake County area. And there's some interesting findings of the correlation between missing school days and air quality. So, just that's one piece. And then the other one, I've been, I'm a co-chair of the Clean Air Caucus at the Utah State Legislature. Is the only bipartisan caucus, and it's been in existence for now, I think it's close to 10 years. It's been pretty exciting. I've been the co-chair for at least 6 or 7 of those 10 years in the Senate side. So Senator Todd Weiler and myself as co-chairs, and then the House has its own bipartisan co-chair component. And so every year, we kind of like run, we get to bring all the legislators. It's very open to the public. It's actually a pretty productive, I would say, process for bipartisan efforts in the legislature. And this year we just announced some of our legislation. I will be running a really comprehensive, aggressive reduction plan legislation that will require funding. So we will be providing incentives and grants to bring more emission reduction projects across the state. So I know it's a really big throw out there and a big dream for me, but I wouldn't be the first time that I take on a difficult issue. And sometimes it takes more than one session or a couple of sessions, but I'm excited. And we are, just so you guys know, we're following the Texas model. So if you are familiar with the the reduction on emissions in Texas, which happens to be very successful. Don't ask me because I will never follow anything that Texas does. But it just happens that on this one, they are pretty successful, and they have an inland port themselves and other type of ports. So, it's obviously a gigantic state, but I'm following that model. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to talk and looking forward to answering any questions. Thank you.